On April 29, 1945, Private First Class Desmond Doss prepared to climb Maeda Escarpment on Okinawa, a cliff American soldiers called Hacksaw Ridge. Doss was 26 years old and served as a combat medic in the 307th Infantry, 77th Infantry Division. Unlike other soldiers, he carried no weapon. He carried medical supplies and a Bible. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. His parents were William Doss and Bertha Oliver Doss. His mother was a Seventh-day Adventist and raised her children with strict religious rules. Doss grew up during the Great Depression in a household that did not have many resources. In his family home, there was a picture showing the biblical story of Cain and Abel with the words, "Thou shalt not kill." Doss later described that image as important to how he understood violence and personal responsibility. He also experienced conflict at home, including a serious incident involving his father, alcohol, and a firearm. Events like these pushed him toward a firm personal decision that he would not take a human life. As a young man, Doss stayed involved with his church and worked regular jobs before joining the Army. He worked at a lumber company and later at a shipyard in Newport News, Virginia. By the time the United States entered World War II, he was part of a generation that watched the war expand across Europe and Asia and understood it would likely pull America in. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. After the attack, many Americans volunteered or were drafted, and the U.S. military expanded quickly. Doss chose to serve. He did not choose combat arms. He chose to serve as a medic. Doss enlisted in April 1942 as a conscientious objector, meaning he refused to kill based on religious conviction, but still wanted to contribute to the war effort. This position was not common in infantry units. Most soldiers expected every man to carry a rifle and be prepared to use it. Doss did not accept that requirement for himself. His position was that he could still do his duty by treating wounded men under fire. Before he reported to duty, he married Dorothy Schutt on August 17, 1942. After that, he entered military training. Doss reported to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training. Basic training for an infantry division prepared men for field conditions, physical endurance, weapons use, discipline, and unit teamwork. For most recruits, learning to shoot was a core part of training. For Doss, it was a line he refused to cross. He refused to handle a rifle or train on the range. He also observed the Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath on Saturdays and refused certain training and duties on that day. These two choices made him stand out immediately. In an infantry training environment, standing out in this way usually creates friction. Many soldiers interpreted refusal to carry a rifle as refusal to do the job. Some believed he was trying to avoid danger. Others assumed he was looking for special treatment. He was insulted by fellow soldiers, mocked during training, and subjected to harassment in the barracks. In some accounts, he was physically assaulted by fellow soldiers. The problem was not limited to the barracks. Officers also challenged his presence. Some officers argued he was unfit for duty. Others tried to discharge him, including attempts to label him mentally unstable because his stance did not fit normal expectations for a soldier in an infantry unit. Doss did not change his position. He did not agree to carry a weapon. He did not request discharge. His stated goal was to serve without compromising his convictions. He wanted to be a medic, not because it was easier, but because it allowed him to participate in the war by saving lives rather than taking them. Eventually, the Army allowed him to continue in the medical role under the conditions that he would still follow orders, deploy with his unit, and do his job under combat conditions. He completed training, became a combat medic, and joined the 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division. To understand Doss's role, it helps to be clear about what a combat medic typically did in World War II's infantry operations. A combat medic was attached to an infantry unit and moved with the line. He carried medical supplies for immediate treatment, bandages, dressings, morphine syrettes, plasma equipment when available, and basic tools needed to stop bleeding and stabilize injuries. A medic's job was not to perform surgery in the field. It was to keep wounded soldiers alive long enough to reach an aid station and later a field hospital. In practice, this meant the medic often went forward when other men went down. The medic had to find the wounded, identify which injuries could be treated quickly, and decide who needed urgent evacuation. He had to treat under threat because wounded men usually fell in exposed places, open ground, trails under machine gun fire, or areas targeted by mortars and artillery. Medics were not immune from being shot. They were often targeted. Even when a medic had visible markings, battlefield conditions did not guarantee protection. So a medic's job required controlled movement under fire, quick decisions, and physical strength to drag or carry men out of danger. Doss accepted this role fully, with the added difficulty that he did it without a rifle. Doss deployed to the Pacific Theater in summer 1944. The Pacific War involved island operations, difficult terrain, heavy humidity, and a defensive Japanese strategy that relied on fortified positions. Rather than meeting attacks in open ground, Japanese defenders often fought from caves, bunkers, concealed emplacements, and networks of trenches and tunnels. This type of defense made casualties high during assaults and made medics' work extremely dangerous. The 77th Infantry Division participated in major operations, and Doss saw combat before Okinawa, including Guam and Leyte. On Guam, Doss treated wounded men under fire. The specifics varied by action, but his pattern of work became consistent. He moved toward casualties, provided treatment in place or after dragging men to partial cover, and stayed in exposed areas longer than most soldiers would. This was the first time many in his unit saw that his refusal to carry a weapon did not mean he was avoiding danger. In combat, it became obvious that he was still taking the same risks as the men with rifles. In some cases, he took more risk because he moved to where the fire was concentrated, the places where wounded men lay. After Guam, the division fought on Leyte in the Philippines. Leyte involved jungle terrain, mud, and constant pressure from Japanese defensive positions. For a medic, the environment added another problem. Evacuation was harder. Carrying a wounded man through mud and steep terrain took time and exposed both the wounded man and the medic. Doss continued his medical work under fire. He crawled or moved low when necessary, reached the wounded, treated them, and helped evacuate them. Over time, soldiers who had mopped him began to accept him as a reliable part of the unit. Some men who initially opposed him later credited him with saving their lives. For his actions in earlier battles, he received 2 Bronze Star medals for valor. These awards mattered because they showed that his record was not based on one event alone. He had already demonstrated repeated performance under fire. The 77th Infantry Division landed on Okinawa on April 26, 1945. Okinawa was expected to be a major staging point for the planned invasion of Japan. Both sides understood its importance. Japanese forces fortified the island with artillery, mines, defensive lines, and extensive use of caves and underground positions. The fighting on Okinawa was sustained and costly. The terrain supported defense. The weather and mud created additional strain. Japanese resistance was organized to slow U.S. advances through layered positions rather than a single line. Within this campaign, Maeda Escarpment became one of the key places that had to be taken. Maeda Escarpment, nicknamed Hacksaw Ridge by American soldiers, was a steep cliff of coral and limestone about 400 feet high. The escarpment was part of a defensive system that allowed Japanese forces to use height, cover, and prepared firing positions. For attackers, the approach created a clear problem. Reaching the top required exposure. Soldiers climbed cargo nets to get up the face. A climb under normal conditions is difficult. Under fire, it becomes worse. Men climbing cannot move quickly, cannot take cover, and cannot return fire effectively. Once at the top, they faced prepared positions. Doss's battalion attacked beginning April 29, 1945. They encountered heavy resistance, small arms fire, machine guns, mortars, and grenades. Casualties occurred during the climb and on the ridge top. Medics like Doss had to work where men fell, often in places that were still under direct fire. On May 5, 1945, after heavy casualties and continued resistance, American forces received orders to retreat from the ridge. A withdrawal under fire creates a different type of danger. Men have to move back while still being shot at. Wounded men who cannot move are at risk of being left behind, not because others do not care, but because the unit is trying to prevent total collapse. During this withdrawal, approximately 75 wounded men remained on top of the escarpment. Some were unable to walk, some were in shock, some were bleeding heavily. Under the conditions of the ridge, reaching them and evacuating them required someone to stay in the exposed area after the unit pulled back.
Doss stayed. He moved across the ridgetop looking for wounded men. He treated them where he found them or dragged them to more protected spots. He stabilized bleeding and managed pain. He prepared men for evacuation. Then he created a way to get them down the cliff. Because the retreat had already begun, organized evacuation was not in place for those remaining. Doss used rope and improvised slings to lower wounded men down the cliff face. This required repeated trips: locate a wounded man, treat him, move him to the edge, secure him, then lower him down, then repeat. Each cycle required time and exposure. It also required enough strength to drag a wounded adult male across uneven ground and then control the lowering process at the cliff edge. Doss did this without a weapon, under ongoing threat from enemy fire. The rescue continued for hours. Soldiers below received the men he lowered and moved them to aid stations for further treatment. Doss remained on the ridgetop until he could no longer find more wounded men to evacuate. The commonly cited number is approximately 75 men saved. The number has been discussed by survivors and historians, but the official recognition uses 75 as the accepted figure. Doss's Medal of Honor recognition covered multiple actions across the Okinawa fighting between April 29 and May 21, 1945. The rescue of men from the escarpment is the best known, but it was part of a longer period of consistent performance under fire. On May 2nd, he rescued a wounded man well forward of the lines under heavy fire, treated him, and brought him back. This type of action is dangerous because it requires crossing open ground that is already being covered by enemy weapons. On May 4th, several soldiers were wounded near a defended enemy cave. Doss moved close to the position through grenade fire to treat the wounded and help evacuate them. In an environment with caves and concealed firing points, distance matters. Moving close means entering the most dangerous zone. In May 21st, he treated and evacuated wounded men under fire again, carrying men significant distance to safety. In addition to direct evacuation, he also stayed with badly wounded men in exposed areas while calling for support and continuing treatment until help arrived. These actions show a pattern. He repeatedly chose to move forward to casualties, treat them, and keep them alive until evacuation was possible.
Doss was wounded multiple times during the Okinawa campaign. Grenade fragments struck him in one incident. Even after being injured, he continued treating others and resisted leaving the line while there were wounded who still needed help. Eventually, medics placed him on a stretcher for evacuation. During that process, he saw another soldier who was more seriously wounded. Doss insisted the other man take his place on the stretcher. This delayed his own evacuation. While waiting, he was hit again, with a sniper's bullet shattering his left arm. With a broken arm and other injuries, he still worked to reach safety. He used a rifle as a splint by securing it to his arm. This is often noted because he had refused to carry a rifle as a weapon, but used one as a tool for survival and stabilization. He then crawled a long distance to reach an aid station. This was not a tactical maneuver. It was a damaged man moving out of the kill zone under the conditions of the battlefield. On October 12, 1945, President Harry S. Truman awarded Doss the Medal of Honor at the White House. The award recognized his actions on Okinawa, including the rescue of wounded men from Hacksaw Ridge and other repeated acts of bravery under fire. A Truman Library photograph record documents the presentation. Doss became the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. His award was important not only for the number of men saved, but for the fact that it was earned while refusing to carry a weapon. The citation emphasized that he repeatedly exposed himself to danger to treat and evacuate wounded men. After the war, Doss suffered from serious health problems. He contracted tuberculosis and underwent major treatment, including removal of part of one lung and several ribs. He spent years recovering in Veterans Administration hospitals. Medical treatment for tuberculosis at the time had severe side effects, and he experienced permanent hearing loss. He lived for a period in Rising Fawn, Georgia, and relied on disability compensation. He and his wife Dorothy had one son, Desmond, Jr. Dorothy died in a car accident in 1991. Doss later remarried. In later years, Doss did not live as a public figure in the way some decorated soldiers did. He spoke occasionally in religious settings and to groups that asked him to share his experience. He continued to describe his actions through the lens of faith and personal conviction rather than military achievement. Desmond Doss died on March 23, 2006, at age 87. He was buried at Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee. Doss's story is a case study in a rare type of military service. He served in an infantry unit as a medic without carrying a weapon. He did not avoid combat. He moved into it to treat the wounded. His unit initially opposed him, then accepted him after seeing repeated performance under fire. His Medal of Honor citation and the official award show that his actions were considered extraordinary by his commanders and by the U.S. military leadership. The Truman Library photograph of the award presentation is a direct visual record of that recognition.